for me. Let's see. Excellent, thank you. All right, welcome folks to the Sustainable Living series. This is a partnership between the Land Stewards, Master Gardeners, and Jackson Soil and Water Conservation. You can collect them all and be a path maker to a better world. And these classes include a personal action list. These are some examples of classes we've had in the past: the Lawns to Meadows class and the Landscaping for Water Conservation class. How it works is at the end of the presentation, Rachel has a couple of personal action items. They are suggestions for change, and you can use this short little link below. I had to take out the QR code, it was broken. Hopefully soon I'll get that little piece of technology fixed. But you can go to this short little link, and what will pull up is the Sustainable Living series list of classes. For each class that we recorded, there's a recording link on there, and then the suggested action items. So you can check that out. I'll make sure when we send out this recording at the end that I also send out a link to that, so you have it, easy access of that. And the Sustainable Living series is part of our community education classes through the Land Stewards Program. My name is Nicole Smith. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that at the beginning. Thing I always forget. I'm the Education Program Assistant for the Land Steward Program. And if you have any questions or class ideas, you're welcome to send them to me. You can also go to the Land Steward Program page on OSU. We type in OSU Land Steward Program, and you can go and subscribe to our MailChimp. We send out emails regarding the upcoming classes. We don't spam you with anything other than upcoming classes. And then we have our class tonight with Rachel, and the next class that we have currently on the calendar is native perennial grasses in November. And that is going to be a hybrid in-person and Zoom class. And then we have some others in the works for December and January. So you can come and join and collect all kinds of land steward classes. But today we are all here for fire reluctant native plants for Firewise landscaping with Rachel. Let's see here. I'm just gonna mute a few folks. There we go. All right. Whoop. Sorry, Rachel. Buttons. Trying to do 3 things at once. So Rachel is the president for the Siskiyou Chapter of the Native Plant Society of Oregon and a professional botanist. For 9 years, she served as a faculty coordinator for the OSU Land Steward Program, during which time she created Firewise educational materials and workshops. We miss Rachel greatly in the Land Steward Program, and we're so glad that you were willing to come out and teach this class for us today, and it's great to see you. And I am going to stop sharing so that you can start sharing your screen.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, it is great to be here. Really fun to see everyone. Let's see if I can, let me try and share first. I have different technology now that I'm not with OSU anymore, so. Okay. Okay, how's that look, Nicole?
That looks great, thank you.
Okay, good. All right. Yes, so it's great to be back with the Land Stewards. It's been a mere 6 weeks or something since I haven't been the coordinator for the Land Steward Program. So it's nice to be back in Land Steward world. And thank you all for everything that you do and for being here. A little bit about myself. Nicole mentioned I'm a professional botanist, so that is my background. My master's is in plant biology. I have worked doing surveys. I have done fuels surveys, monitoring for Oregon Department of Forestry. I've done a lot of education around fire, specifically for fire, and also within the Land Steward program through OSU. So I have a lot of a depth of kind of experience, I've also had the great honor to work with lots and lots of really wise professionals, people who work with fire. So that's not to say that I know everything, but I do have experience in this field. So I'm happy to share about this and kind of give my take on fire, native plants for fire reluctant landscapes. And before I get going, I want to, let's see if this is going to work. Whoop, there we go. We're going to talk about fire today. And fire can be quite traumatic. It's also, part of what we are as a species and definitely part of where we live. And I just want to acknowledge that we've had some pretty devastating fires recently in our recent history, and there are probably people in the audience who've been through that. So I just want to let you know that we'll be talking about fire and having images of fire. And if you just need to take a break, you can do that. This is being recorded. There's a past version of this that's also been recorded, so you can come back if it gets kind of intense for you. I mean, I'm not planning on making it intense. I just want to acknowledge that. Okay, so what we are going to go over today, let me see if I can get a laser pointer here. Here we go. Doop. Here we go. All right. So first we'll talk a little bit about fire in Southwest Oregon. So just a little bit about fire history and ecology, just a little bit to kind of orient us. And then we're going to talk about the home ignition zone, which is a large topic. I'm going to mostly focus around plant topics. There are a lot of things that can be covered in that. We'll talk a little bit about fire behavior, so how it works in terms of interacting with plants, and species characteristics within the home ignition zone. So then we'll talk some about why I'm talking about natives. Why am I stressing natives? Characteristics of that. And then I'll give you some species to consider. And really, you could consider almost any native species there. It's more like there are just a handful maybe not to consider. A lot of our native species from this area are good ones to think of. And then at the end, I think I've been asked to include the anecdotes that I have included in this presentation. So, well, 2 of the 3 times that I've done this around the Almeida fire and observations that I made after that. So hopefully we'll have time to do that. I'll just try to control myself. Let's see. So, okay, come on. There we go. All right, so kind of as another version of a land acknowledgement, we're all working to learn and remember what the present and past fire, land, and plant stewards did in this landscape. So this landscape that we live in has a long history of stewardship using fire to interact with the plants and the resources of the Native Americans. So there are lots of people who lived in this landscape and used fire and still do. Down in the bottom left, those are Yurok people tending their tan oak grove for multiple resources for food and for fire safety and other things. So, the Shasta, the Cow Creek Umpqua, the Takelma in the Ashland area, especially, the Cayuse, Umatilla, Walla Walla, Modoc, these are all tribes who have been managing this land for millennia with fire. Okay. So here locally, Native people have managed the landscape with vegetation for food resources, for basketry materials and other living materials, for animal resources, for just accessibility purposes, for probably even for safety purposes. And humans really worldwide, I read not too long ago that some anthropologists are now calling humans the pyrophilic primate and attributing our dependence on and use of fire as a key characteristic of our species. So throughout, Australians use a lot of fire, but really even European people used fire. There's whether we're cooking with it, managing landscapes, it's something that we really interact with all the time. Now we've kind of harnessed it in different ways, but fire is a part of who we are and what we bring to the landscape. So historically, there have been studies that have been done, especially with Carrie Metlin and the Nature Conservancy, where they've looked at the fire return interval for the Southwest Oregon. And they do this by looking at cross sections of older trees and then counting. You can mark where the tree rings are on the bark, so you can see kind of these regular fire intervals happening. These are the dates, 1732, or 22, 33 kind of regular fires happening right up through about 1902. And then suddenly they pause and the next fire happens in 1995. So almost 90 years afterwards. So something happened between here and there. So look at those historic fire intervals, those ones where the fires were coming back regularly. They looked at tree cookies around the Rogue River watershed. So in the Ashland watershed, the fire return interval was 11 years, plus or minus 14 years. Immigrant Creek was 6 years, plus or minus 8 years. Big Butte Creek, 5 years return interval, plus or minus 20. So it's variable, but it's also regularly coming back. And so we have lightning strikes here sometimes in the drier parts of the season. But what they have also found is that a lot of this burning was happening in the shoulder season. They can even see that by looking at those tree cookies. So in the, once the fires had, the rains had started a little bit, or before it got really dry, even the native people were historically using those shoulder seasons to burn the way we do now, where we're trying to incorporate those practices more. But what happened was around 1910, after some big fires and political conversations, we decided in this country to do aggressive fire suppression. And not only were we trying to get every fire out by 10 a.m., but we stopped using fire in the landscape. So prior to that, the early colonial people had come in and learned from the Native Americans how to manage the landscape with fire. It helped keep it more open, was better for getting through, better for game. And a lot of people were really in favor of that light burning, but that also was discouraged. So we stopped letting wildfires burn, and we stopped putting our own fires on the land. Now we have really been ramping up with climate change, having a lot drier and hotter summers. So that's also kind of exacerbating the situation for us, and things are really changing. So here are another series of slides that kind of illustrate that. This is a series that was put together by Max Bennett, who used to work for OSU Southwest Oregon large fires from 1960 to 2018. So this first image is large fires from 1960 to 79. So if you've been watching fire maps lately, you'll see that those don't look like very large fires, but that was what we were thinking of as large fires. This is 1980 to 99. So now they're getting a bit bigger. And then this is 2000 to 2018, and they're much bigger. And if we put the more recent ones on, I think they would be bigger still. So you can see that things are changing. Things are ramping up. We all know that. We live here. We see it happening. So we live in a landscape where there is fire, there will be fire, and really the landscape, the ecology, we need fire. A lot of our species are fire adapted. It's part of, we have rare plants that are rare because we don't have fire in the landscape. We have overgrown stands of things because they're used to be being regenerated with fire. Things like lodgepole pine, which has serotinous closed cones that only open with fire. They're meant to burn. So we have lots of plants that need fire in all kinds of different ways. So it's good to embrace your inner pyrophile and learn to live with it, learn to be wise about it. That's what we're here to do. So that's a little bit about fire in Southwest Oregon. Now we're going to talk about the home ignition zone. So it might be that you already know about this, and it will be review for you. And again, it won't be exhaustive, but I will cover some aspects of it. We'll talk a little about fire behavior and species characteristics, evaluating species for the home ignition zone. So becoming fire adapted, how are we going to do that? So what we need to do is learn and prepare. So a number of things. There are great websites out there. OSU has a really wonderful forestry and natural resources program with a big fire program. They have put a lot of funding, a lot of grant funding into that, into educating people. If you search the fire program, you'll find all kinds of recorded sessions, all kinds of materials that you can download. And I really recommend that you do. The University of Nevada, Reno also has really great ones. This is Living with Fire. They've got some wonderful resources as well. So it's a little bit hard for me to go forward here. So you want to learn and then work on preparing. And you don't have to get it all done all at once, but winter is a great time for this. You can be watching those videos, maybe alternate between Netflix and some fire education. You can do some things that they're going to tell you to do, like create your evacuation plan. I really recommend you do that because it's very likely that it's going to impact you. And when you are in a panic about evacuating, you won't make wise decisions. So really make that evacuation plan. You can be sorry that you leave things behind. Let's see, do what you can to improve the conditions of your home ignition zone. So that's the area around your house, which I'll be talking about a little bit, that can lead to your house igniting and starting to burn. That's why it's called that. So those include things like home hardening, which I won't be talking about, but there are resources for that. What's going on with your fences? What are your decks like? What kind of mulches are you using? And then vegetation, which is going to be my focus. So the placement and maintenance of your vegetation is really important, and key for this presentation, the species and what kinds of natives might be good for that. So remember, we live in a landscape that needs fire, so we want to learn how to live best here in an area that is likely to have fire visit it. So a little bit about how fire behaves. Wildfire threatens home in 3 ways. So just a moment while I'm talking here, think about which way that fire interacts with our houses causes the most home loss. So one in this top, these pictures are a little bit small, but in this top, the idea is that these are embers. So you have a burning forest and you have flying embers and maybe firebrands, but especially sparks blowing towards this house and starting the fire. So 1 is embers, 2 is radiant heat. So big things burning next to the house and burning so hot that they're after time igniting the house from lateral radiant heat from those fires. So that's the second one. And then the third one is actual contact by flames. So flames licking on the side of your house. A lot of people think that that's what burns down most houses, is that wall of flames coming and burning your house. But in fact, research shows, they look into it, and most houses burn due to embers than any more burned due to embers than any other cause. And really it's about those embers getting inside the house through screening, occasionally through broken windows, but really it's more often than not the embers coming in. It's not those other factors. Those other factors can start a house on fire, but embers are amazingly tricky. If you think of like a storm of embers, they're also great materials about that. So knowing that embers are a factor, we can think a little bit about fires as vegetation as allies. So this image here is from Australian materials, where again, they have a lot of fire in their landscape as well, but they show how if you have moisture-rich plants near your house, between you and the fire, it can shield from radiant heat and protect your house. And I'll have some images at the end that kind of demonstrate some of these things. Moisture-rich vegetation depresses the fire intensity. It can also screen the embers from your home. One of my early experiences with the Land Steward Program was with Brian Ballou, who worked for Oregon Department of Forestry, and he was their fire kind of communicator. And he told me stories of watching oak trees, just, late summer oak trees, native white oaks, absorbing this storm of embers coming and just blowing into the vegetation, but not igniting. And that's kind of what I mean by fire reluctant species. They don't want to burn. They're not going to enjoy that, but they're not inclined to burn. So these sometimes fire professionals will even advise folks who live out in the country to, plant species that could be a good ember screen from the direction of prevailing winds. So remember, and I'll talk about this more in other ways as well, but plants can be an ally as well. So when we're managing our landscapes for the event of a fire, we're talking about the home ignition zone. So that's the area next to your, from your foundation out 100 or 200 feet. And these different zones, different educators, different programs kind of divide them differently, but they're sort of basically the same concepts. And often in the Land Steward Program, for example, we're often talking about rural homes. So we can talk about the near in kind of zone, and these have different names, which I'll tell you, that might be, between up to 5 feet and then up to 30 feet. And then we might talk up to then further out 100 to 200 feet, your defensible space. Now, the reality is, if you live in town, your neighbors we are all in each other's defensible space. And there's really nothing that burns as well. Nothing is dry and wonderfully kept and full of flammable items than a house. So it's like having a giant wood pile 30 feet away. I have on three sides, I have giant wood piles 30 feet away, and I'm a giant wood pile next to my neighbor's house. So it's just something to consider, that it's a reality of living in town. And so kind of talking with your neighbors about it, and also understanding that that is the reality. You're not going to remove, no one's going to remove their houses and give us all 200 feet from those houses, for example. So this document right here is from the Land Steward Program. This is going to be one of my 3 steps. You can download it online, and it will give you some best practices for the home ignition zone, give you some checklists at the back so you can kind of evaluate your landscape. So the guidelines, as I said, they vary quite a bit, but generally it's a close to your house, a little bit further from your house, and then further, and kind of recommendations for plants. And I'll talk about those details, but kind of don't get hung up on exactly what it is. The point of this, really of all the education, is that you get an idea about how fire works, and you understand what its potential is for behaving, and so what you try to do with your landscape. The exact numbers aren't as important. So, but let's talk about it a little bit more. So here we have another Keeping Your Home and Property Safe from Wildfire, another OSU publication. And this document is from, so much of this presentation is from 2023 and 2022. So some of these documents might have been, have new graphics or be updated, but they're pretty recent. This one is from Ashland. So this is again talking about the home ignition zone. So all of these ways of thinking about it talk about the different zones. So the first zone is the one that's right close to your house. So zone, sometimes it's called 1A, sometimes it's called 0. It's the immediate zone, the non-combustible zone, or ember resistant zone. That's what you want it to be like. It's 0 to 5, or sometimes 0 to 3. And now they're really recommending rock mulches, succulent plants. If you think of succulent, like hen and chicks types plants, have a lot of moisture in them and they're unlikely to ignite, or low irrigated herbaceous plants are recommended. So that's this part right here, right close into your house. Then zone 1, or the next zone out, is 5 to 30, and that's the intermediate zone. That's often all you get in an urban landscape. And that is recommended to be lean, clean, and green. So low density vegetation, not lots and lots of vegetation. Again, when you're talking about fire and fuels, it's mostly the organization of those fuels. So if you have breaks in fuels, then it's harder for things to ignite. Low density vegetation, well maintained and pruned. So you want to clear out the dead material and limb things up. That's, as I said, the residential landscape. And we're not really going to talk about zone 2, which is 30 to 100 or 200 feet, because that's, well, I mean, we could talk about it, but I'm focusing more on kind of right around your house and what you might have if you're in an urban landscape. But that's the outer defensible space, more natural vegetation, and you want to reduce the fuels, limb things up, but that's also going to be your neighbor's house if you live in town. And there are lots of good materials that you can research about that. So we're going to focus on these inner zones here. So what you want to avoid and consider removing, plants that have these characteristics. So the characteristics on this slide are characteristics of less fire resistant plants, more fire prone plants. So maybe fire enthusiastic species as opposed to fire reluctant species. So plants that are more eager to burn, let's say, are plants that accumulate dead and dry branches or leaves. So junipers are notorious for this, especially that prostrate juniper is a really bad one. If you cut into these hedges, it's great for landscaping because it's like drought resistant. So you see it planted around, but if you cut into it, you can see it's just full of all these little dead twigs, little dead branchlets. And that's a lot of great material for if embers get in there, along with the volatile oils, which is the next point. So they can really ignite and really burn. So volatile oils are resins. So if you take the plant and you crush it in your fingers, it smells strong. Any plant that is drought stressed, whether they're non-natives or natives, they are going to be more fire prone. So even our native and fire tolerant species or fire resistant species, if they're really drought stressed, they'll be more inclined to burn. evergreen plants, but not all evergreen plants, but especially the worst ones, the ones that are generally on the avoid lists for towns are Leland cypress, species of junipers, things like arborvitae, those Italian cypresses. When I bought my house here, I had all three of those. I had Leland cypress, Italian cypress, the tall paintbrush one, and arborvitae. And my neighbor, who is a fire professional, said he was really glad when I took down those Italian cypresses because they go off like a Roman candle and they just are throwing sparks that are going and blowing and ready to go into another house. So you can see this is about my evergreen, but not all. And most towns and fire professionals don't agree with me on this. And these are just observations, although people want to be very careful about recommending things because fire is a liability. And so I just want to stress that everything will burn. And this is a picture from the Almeida fire. So this was a line of Leland cypresses. This was a Scotch pine, which Scotch pines are from Scotland, where it's notoriously green and rainy. They don't like a dry climate. They tend to die around here and be drought stressed. And this is a native incense cedar. So all of these trees burned. This tree looks unhappy, but it did not ignite. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into it later, but our incense cedar has a much more open branching. It doesn't retain all those little dry twigs as much. It tends to limb itself up. It drops lower branches, and if you limb it up, then that will be even more the case. And the branchlets themselves actually have a lot of moisture in them. If you experiment like putting things on the campfire, they're not really that eager to burn. I think that it's not the same kind of volatile oils and small dry branchlets as something like a Leland cypress. And I saw that a lot after the Almeida fire. They're still not recommended in towns. I just want to stand up for them. So characteristics, so those are characteristics of species that you don't want around your house. So dry dead branches, volatile oils or resins, drought stressed, most evergreens, don't do those things. So now characteristics of more fire resistant plants. And when I first put this together, I started to think of the word fire reluctant because everything will burn in the right conditions. We know that. In the Almeida fire, we had 45-mile-an-hour winds and single-digit humidity, and things burned like crazy. So I'm going to read this paragraph. This is from UNR, and they say some plants are harder to ignite. They generate less heat when they are burning if they start to burn. They produce shorter flames than other plants. So all of that is going to depress the effect of the fire in your neighborhood in general. So these differences can be attributed to both inherent characteristics of the plant, but also such as naturally occurring differences among plant species and cultural practices such as pruning and irrigation. So again, what you're doing in your landscape is also going to be a factor, which is why understanding how fire works and interacts with plants is what's most important. So fire reluctant plants will have leaves with higher moisture content. So most deciduous plants fall into this. They're drought resistant or drought tolerant. And that means that they hang on to their moisture better. So they maintain more moisture even in drier conditions. So they're going to be kind of always have more of a depressing effect on fire. A lower growing habit so that it doesn't make as tall of flames, which are more dangerous and can spread more. They don't build up a lot of dead material in them, like that picture of the juniper. They lack flammable chemicals, so often that strong smelling resins. And then something we can't know by looking at them, but you can look it up in some resources, like if they have a high soap content inside them. So plants can make saponins, and you would know that as plants have been a source of soap, or mineral content. So there are lists that will show you that, and I'll talk about that later. And then how they're maintained. So they're well watered according to their needs, they're pruned and properly placed. So those are the characteristics. And that's much more important. Understanding those features is really more important than identifying single species, except for a few that are especially risky. So understanding that, be wise, and as my friend says, don't punish the plant. So I have another friend who works in ecology and fire education, and this is a picture from after the Almeida fire, something that once you start looking at towns burning down, you'll see lots of this, where like Brian Ballou said, it's more common for the house to burn the tree than for the tree to burn the house. So you'll have the house burned down completely and these singed and unhappy, but still leaved trees around them. So that's really a common thing to see and good to be aware of. So selecting plants, we're going to start moving into lists, but not a list, but plant species. I just want to say a few more words about lists. So in our area, and I think in a lot of areas, but in our area, after the Almeida fire, our towns and municipalities started putting a lot of work into generating lists of recommended and not recommended species. And as I said, it's a tricky thing because really everything will burn. And some things tend to burn less, but do you want to say it burns less and then it burns? So people are cautious, innately kind of cautious about it. So follow the list for where you live, look at the list and what it says and pay attention to that. And then also kind of try to understand about the plants using those characteristics that I mentioned before. This is another awesome resource from OSU that has come out. It's been updated. And they in here again talk about how there isn't a lot of science about the burning of plants. There are just so many variables and factors, but they still, this is a list of things, not all natives, but a lot of natives. They talk about the characteristics. You can look that up online as well. Okay, so we talked about fire ecology, a little bit about the home ignition zone. Now let's talk about why we want to think about natives. So we're talking about fire, but there are a lot of reasons to think about natives. So we're all aware of kind of, well, now the world is in a crazy place. There's a lot going on, but people are concerned about fire, about climate change, and countries get together and they talk about what they can do about climate change. They're also very concerned about biodiversity. There is a shocking decrease in biodiversity globally. So countries are getting together, talking about how to fix that. There are these reports that come out every couple of years from the Living Planet that has reported that wildlife populations have plummeted by 69%. So it's everything from insects, you might have seen those headlines about the insect apocalypse, to other organisms. The biggest driver of that is loss of habitat. So we humans are an amazing keystone species. We really affect the surface of the earth. And every living thing, whether it's a plant, an insect, a fungus, a person, we all need habitat, which is food, water, shelter, and space. So what we do as humans is we really convert the surface of the earth to our uses. We do agriculture, we make housing developments, we do mining, but agriculture is a big piece of it. But land degradation seriously impacts 75% of terrestrial ecosystems. I grew up in Minnesota and I fly back there kind of frequently. And every time I'm going over the Great Plains and I look down at that amazing quilt of agriculture, I think about how little native vegetation there is. We really convert things. It's hard to remember living in our area as you're driving down the road and looking out and seeing the wild mountains. But if you zoom up and you look down, you can see that even here we are converting the surface of the earth. So losing habitat is the thing that's driving that decrease in wildlife populations. It's the number one thing. Other things are impacting it, but if you look into those reports, habitat loss is the first. So when you think about habitat, really there's soil and then there are plants and there's a food web and there are trophic levels. So the plants are converting the energy of the sun, and the insects, most insects, the first trophic level, they're putting their eggs on these plants, native plants, which don't want to be eaten and have chemical defenses. So the insects have evolved to be able to be on certain plants. There's a interaction with that. And then other organisms are eating those insects. Some organisms eat the plants also, but especially things like birds eat insects. They might eat berries and other things, but for their babies, they really need that protein rich, and they themselves in different times of their life need protein rich insects. So they're a critical food source. Protein rich insects are a critical food source for most breeding birds. And most native insects, most insects are specific to the host plants, not just for nectar. So you can think of like, is that a bee flower? Is that a butterfly flower? There is some specificity there, but they're more general. But it's the babies that really need to be on certain species or certain groups of plants, because the plants have created these chemical defenses to ward off insects, and then the insects have to get around those. So that's how you get those really specific host relationships. The monarch is kind of the classic flagship of that kind of a relationship, but there are many. 90% of plant-eating insects species are specialists. So native plants really matter in the landscape. And caterpillars are the bread and butter of the terrestrial food systems. And caterpillars are picky eaters, so the vast majority of them really need native plants. So native plants, if you pick natives for your yard and garden, native plants support a resilient landscape in lots of ways. They support wildlife habitat. They're the best way to support wildlife. Pollinators, but the thing is, every pollinator was a baby at one point, and it needed a plant that it could eat. So not only do the pollinators need to be able to nectar, they need to be able to chomp down on those plants. So they're host plants for native insects to breed and lay their larvae. And native birds eat arthropods. Those are bugs, not just berries and seeds. And then another thing about natives and non-natives as well, but dead stems and leaves provide habitat for many insects in the overwintering. So you might have heard that phrase, leave the leaves. You can leave them, the insects will drop down. Many insects drop down and overwinter in dead leaves, and then clean in the late spring before the fire season so that you don't leave those fuels. So native plants support wildlife habitat. They also tend to conserve water in our area. If you have natives from our area, our natives are adapted to a very dry and warm summer. So they're generally better adapted than many horticultural choices that we might put into our landscape. So they generally stay moister and more fire resistant with less irrigation. And that moisture content in the vegetation can depress the intensity of the fire. And then native trees as well as non-native trees, but they can shade and cool your home in the urban landscape. And that also can depress fire as well, as long as they're placed well. Okay, so that's why natives. So now we'll talk about some species, and I want to share with you the resources that I used in putting together the list. So I have maps on the species, and those are from the Oregon Flora. It's no longer called the Oregon Flora Project. It's the Oregon Flora, and that's a wonderful one to look up. You'll get these slides. I think they're going to share the PDF with you. So much information there, and also gardening advice on how to pick plants for your area if you really want to support native wildlife. And then CalScape is put together by the California Native Plant Society, and they have updated the images that I have are from their former version. They've now updated their website, but it's a great resource, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. And then iNaturalist Community Commons images. So iNaturalist is an app for your phone that helps you identify if you're on a learning curve, which we all are, about natives or any other plants. It's a great thing to put into your smartphone. And then if people set their image rights at Community Commons, then other people can use them for education. And then this is, I was talking about soaps in plants, and this resource can actually share that information with you. So this is Fire Resistance of Plants, Master Database and Placement of Species within Firewise Landscape Zones for Southern Idaho, which is different, but not extremely different than here. So they talk about the moisture content of the plant, the size of the plant, the soap, and the volatile oils and resins, and then they rank the species. The higher numbers are better, so those higher numbers are the ones that you want closer to your house. The lower numbers mean they're more flammable. So it's their fire resistance score, which seems a little backwards, but just remember the higher numbers are better. Okay, so this is CalScape. Just want to talk about that a little bit. Again, it looks different now, but the information is there and probably more. So they talk about the plant description. They say what kind of plant it is, how tall it gets, so that will help you place it. How fast it grows, whether it's deciduous or not. And then it will talk about the wildlife supported. And that's something I'm going to key in on here. So they'll say, like, do birds or other wildlife interact with it, but they also will show the host, how many butterflies and moths are hosted. So those are the baby insects, the caterpillars, the eggs being laid, and then eating those insects or eating those plants, whatever it is. So for this one in mock orange, there are 2 likely, and often it will be how many are hosted and then how many are likely, and that's often based on the relationship of the plant to other plants. And really, a lot of it isn't known yet. there's a lot still that they are finding out about insect host plants, those relationships. And really, you just have to know that if it's a native, it's interacting with the native flora, fauna. So other things about the landscaping information, what kind of sun it wants, and companion plants you could put with it, and then what kind of maintenance you want to do and how to propagate in the zone. So lots of information. CalScape is a great resource. Click. Okay. So let's talk about, we're going to start with trees and shrubs, well, trees and then shrubs and then herbaceous plants. So remembering that the right vegetation can function as an ember screen. That's an Oregon white oak. So Doug Tallamy, who some of you might be familiar with, and he's a great one to get into if you're interested in this topic. He says, if you're going to plant one thing, make it an oak. Now, maybe not everybody has space for it, but oaks are just powerhouses of wildlife support. So our Oregon white oak, so to show you, this is the map from the Oregon flora. So it shows you where it grows natively, where it natively occurs. And then here's CalScape, this information kind of on the propagation. So Oregon white oak, oftentimes in our area, it's shorter, but it can get to 90 feet. This is the range of black oak. So black oak goes down into California, and Oregon white oak goes a little bit up and a little bit down, but it's strong in Oregon. It needs low moisture, and these again are from CalScape, and full sun or a little bit of shade, but really they prefer sun. Black oak likely hosts 178 species of lepidopterans only. So this is white oak. I'm not sure if I have a circle here. No, I don't. So I want to look here. Butterflies and moss, you might not be able to see it. 38 confirmed, 138 likely of just moths and butterflies that are hosted by white oaks. And then black oaks are 178 species likely. So that's why this is a really wonderful plant to put into your garden. It really will host a lot of native species or your yard to have. The other thing is oak habitat is really in huge decline in Oregon. So oaks are generally found in lower elevations. These are images from the Willamette Valley where kind of the loss of oaks it's really critical. So you can see this is from 1938 where you used to find oaks. And then this is 2007, and this is 2013. So this is the Willamette Valley, and what is going on in the Willamette Valley? It's not a bunch of oaks anymore. There might be pastures, but a lot of times the oaks are taken out. So it's development, it's agriculture, it's pastures that have been cleared. Oftentimes they're cleared. Trees aren't very convenient for irrigation if you want to have irrigation. So it's our human activities. We really compete with that oak habitat. And it would be great if we could both do what we want to do and have oaks, because then we could still be supporting those moths and butterflies and other species. White oaks, I think they're said to support like 300 species all told. So this is Jackson County, and this is our oak. These are our oak species. And you can see it's the same thing all around the edges. And in the middle, what's in the middle of kind of the Bear Creek Valley up here, this is the Table Rocks. And we know what's in the middle, and it's all of our development. That used to be oak habitat, oak savannas. So even here, though it seems like we have a lot of wildlands and a lot of oaks, a lot of times working with the Land Steward Program, I have people that are new to the area that would come in and think, oh, these scrubby oaks, I'm just going to clear those out because they're just, they're not that attractive. They're not like the big eastern oaks or different things like that. Not knowing that they are really a key piece of our diversity and wonder of our area. So plant oaks, leave oaks. They're a great one. And they're really good ember screens. Big leaf maple is another one. So it's often considered, it is a riparian species, but you can also find it on north slopes occurring. So it's a good one to have in a yard where you might have intermediate watering. So in our towns and in my yard, I inherited my house with a red maple, which is beautiful in the fall as long as it gets water. Red maple is native to the eastern United States. Another one of its common names is the swamp maple, and it really wants water. When I want to conserve water, it's unhappy. So big leaf maple would be a better choice to plant in your yard and would also support a lot. It's 2 confirmed and 85 likely in terms of just looking at moths and butterflies. So those are just kind of an example of the support that this species is probably giving in the landscape. They get big to 100. They can be in full sun or part shade. They're moisture moderate to high, but as I said, they'll occur in dry north slopes. Okay. Oh, it's another one. Well, I don't know about that family. I won't mention that. So Rocky Mountain maple is a maple that occurs a little bit higher elevations. I don't see people planting that, but it seems like it could be a good one to experiment with. Again, it's a smaller tree, a shorter tree, and so it's got 1 confirmed and 72 likely species that it hosts. So these are kind of just examples, and I hope that you'll learn how to look into plants yourself. So here you can see where it occurs. And then this score right here is the score from that Southern Idaho list, looking at all the factors about how big it is, whether it has soaps, those kind of features. So this, they're saying not right next to your house. Mostly because it's big, I think, bigger. Quaking aspen is another one. So I have one of these in my yard and I can compare that to the red maple. This says moisture moderate to high, but my aspen does much better with the amount of water that I want to give my yard. So I think that that's another one. They can have issues like all plants can, but mine grows well and I see them growing well around town. Sun to part shade, and 98 species confirmed and 40 likely. So my quaking aspen is just full of birds when the catkins are coming out. It's just, I think they're pecking all around on everything that's going on there. Lots of bugs. And you can see there's the range from the Oregon flora. Douglas hawthorn is a pretty one. So you want to watch out for non-native invasive hawthorns that just spread and become invasive in the landscape. But we have native hawthorns in our area and they have pretty white blooms in the spring and hosts 36 likely species of moths and butterflies. They get to be about 15 feet, full sun, part shade. Another option. So in general, on those urban lists, conifers are not recommended. And I just wanted to point out a couple of observations. Go with your list, follow your city's advice. Again, these are Almeida fire pictures, and this is another incense cedar in another context. So this was right next to a fence, part of what burned down, an incense cedar, and you can see how it got singed by the fire, but it didn't want to just become a part of the conflagration. It just got singed, but it didn't ignite, didn't want to ignite. Here it is. This is right next to my husband's house that burned down in the Almeida fire. So you can see there's a fence. This fence between this house burned down, and then there's that incense cedar that didn't burn. These are giant sequoias, young giant sequoias. You can see that the ground burned there, singed these lower branches. But again, that's an indication of a plant that is reluctant to ignite under the right circumstances. So under trees in general, conifers are not recommended, and I would generally follow that, and especially the ones I mentioned earlier, and I just want to make these commentaries. So kind of moving into the more shrub-like category, orange honeysuckle is a vine. So vines, you want to think about where you put them, and they can vine to 10 feet, but they hold a lot of moisture in their leaves. They're drought resistant. They're in our forests. You'll see them. They have pretty blossoms. The hummingbirds love them. And it says moths and butterflies, 14 likely. But again, you want to think about your placement with those. Douglas spirea is a really pretty one that will tend to make a big clump. So again, your placement is important that you think about. Part shade to full sun. This is a riparian species, but a lot of our riparian species are really good for kind of a moderately watered domestic landscape. So this says moisture moderate to high, but again, I just water enough to keep really my red maple alive in my yard, and all of the riparian species do well. Many of our riparian areas, our small streams, go dry in the summer, or our wet meadows go dry, and so our riparian species also are adapted to this summer of less moisture. So tolerant of many growing conditions, wildlife supported. So again, you'll have, they're talking about the nectaring species and then 1 confirmed species as a host and 33 likely. Lewis's mock orange we mentioned before. You can see where it grows, all those places. Part shade to full sun. Moisture very low, 3 times a month when established. So that's a riparian species in our area, but it's got that tolerance. again, tolerant of many growing species conditions. And even when they say too, again, for the nectaring species, they'll be all over on it. And these are undercounts in terms of the wildlife that is supported. I'll show you an example towards the end. So Oregon boxwood, there isn't much information on that one, but people have boxwood bushes all over, and this is an evergreen shrub that you'll find in the forest. I'd love to see that available. I haven't run into it, but I think it could be an interesting one. Silk tassel is another really low moisture shrub that grows in our area. So evergreen, also doesn't lose its leaves, and they don't have wildlife supported, but they're supporting. Again, if you go out and you see leaves chewed by insects, that means that it's supporting wildlife. And I've definitely seen that with silk tassels. Common snowberry is a good one. And this is one of the ones that is listed as having high soap content. So you can see that list from Idaho, they have it as 8. So that's in the first 10 feet for snowberry. So soap content, again, has a depressive effect on the fire. And it's also got holds a lot of moisture and is drought tolerant, and can be in full sun or part shade. 10 confirmed species that it supports and 19 likely. Common snowberry and creeping snowberry. Blue elderberry is another one that has soap content in it. Sometimes it can develop some dead branches that you would want to keep pruned out. But so this is like a large shrub, 20 to 30 feet. But again, moisture needs are low. Lots of blossoms. The birds love the berries. You'll get banded pigeons. Maybe, I don't know if you will, but the banded pigeons love blue elderberries. And then it's a host to 23 species likely, and probably, well, anyway, lots of nectaring species as well. Chokecherry. So Doug Tallamy, who talks about, again, has done a lot to promote this idea of natives. The oaks are a tremendous species, a keystone species, and then the prunus species are also really huge supporters of wildlife. So it's good to have some species that support a very wide range. You have insects that are really narrow specialists, and then you have some species that will support a lot of different native species. So the chokecherry, we have 3 species of prunus in our area, and chokecherry is one of them. Again, this is a widely distributed species. They get 15 to 25 feet, so lots of blossoms in the spring that you'll have nectaring insects, and then they support 46 confirmed species and 122 likely. So that's like a small tree, but it tends to spread. I really love this one. Bitter cherry is another of our native cherries, and this one is 15 to 25 feet, can be in the sun or shade, moisture low to very low, and supports 10 to 156 likely species. Again, one of those keystone species. Willows are also huge supporters of wildlife. Put a circle on there. So it says 3 confirmed, 213 likely. In my urban house, my neighbors have a willow across the street. They have a couple of willows, and every other spring I'll see this beautiful moth that is hosted by willow species. And I know it's because they have willows across the street. Big, giant, beautiful moth. So they get to be bigger, so you want to think about the placement. They can be in the sun or shade, moisture low to high. This is Scowler's willow or Schooler's willow, which is our kind of dryland willow, which has quite pretty fall foliage. Now, red flowering currant, that is one that people might be familiar with. This is our last shrub species I'm going to talk about today, 6 to 13 feet, sun to part shade, moisture low, again, 3 times a month, and just gorgeous in the spring. It also has berries, and 1 confirmed and 85 likely in terms of hosting insects, but the hummingbirds love the flowers, birds eat the berries. So that's another wonderful one to plant in your yard. So now we're going to move into herbaceous species, and most perennial wildflowers are good things to put into your yard. And I'm saying perennial. Annuals can be good as well, but perennials often have storage organs in the ground, so that with low water, they're adapted to our dry summers. So with low water, they can still maintain themselves and be happy. You don't have to water them as much usually. So this one is bleeding hearts, native bleeding hearts. This is way up near the top of Table Rocks, quite a dry environment all summer, just gorgeous. Many of our native species are also, even if they're perennials, they're summer dormant. So depending on how much you're watering them, they'll kind of dry and wither in the summer. And bleeding hearts kind of do that, but they stay all year. Just the greenery kind of stays there all through the summer, but it kind of fades and becomes less luxuriant, which is one of the things about native plants you want to embrace and get used to and appreciate. California poppy is another one that we see everywhere, quick growing, full sun to part shade, moisture low, confirmed to host 5 species and 2 others that are likely. Silver lupin, and again, there are so many to choose from. I just threw a few in here. We have a lot of lupin species. This can become kind of a shrub, very beautiful, 3 feet, moisture moisture very low. It's very attractive to bees, those leguminous flowers, and it hosts 7 confirmed and 49 likely lepidopteran species. Nettle-leaved horsemint. Let's see, this one, agastaches, the hyssops are huge for pollinating insects. So they're really, I mean, they're just always covered in bees and butterflies when you go up into the mountains, or even if you have horticultural species planted. But it doesn't list them as a host for any insects, and that may be true. And I also think that it's probably just not known, but definitely the pollinating insects love them. Then asters are always a good species, often for later in the summer, late blooms, July to August. So this is just one example of our rough-leaved aster, hosts 1 confirmed and 3 likely, but they're good for late season pollinators. And then here's another example. This is from my yard. These pictures are from my yard. This is a ground cover, a slow growing ground cover, but a lot of native things are kind of slow growing, but it really it's a much better thing to plant than ivy. It doesn't become invasive, and it really spreads over time wonderfully. It's you want to put it into shaded kind of north sides, but this is another one that when you look it up, it doesn't say that it hosts any wildlife, but you can see that insects are eating it. So if insects are eating it, it's hosting in some sense or another. These are pollinated by ants and gnats and flies. And the seeds are spread by ants. I'm sorry, the seeds are spread by ants, and gnats and flies pollinate them. But they want to be in the shade, wild ginger. And then wild strawberries are another one of those keystone species. So we had the oak for a tree, we have the prunus for the smaller shrubs, and wild strawberries. The Fragaria are a real keystone for ground cover. And again, this is just our forest strawberry that I have collected and brought home and planted under my raspberries, and it's a great ground cover. It spreads quite happily, and it's amazingly drought tolerant when it gets to be established. And here ours says 1 confirmed and 41 likely, but this is another one recommended by Doug Tallamy. And again, this is good under any kind of area. They like sun, they grow in the shade. They're wonderful species. Okay, so those are just some, but really you can pick any natives almost any natives that you're interested in. Just kind of look them up, look at their characteristics and evaluate them. Where to find native plant materials. Our Native Plant Society, I have the next slide shows you how to get there, but if you just look up the Native Plant Society of Oregon, and on our Siskiyou Chapter page, we have a link for native plant resources in Southwest Oregon, any of our native nurseries, but the Klamath Siskiyou Native Seeds, the Rogue Native Plant Partnership, and the Understory Initiative. All of these organizations have plant sales. Our Master Gardeners, the extension centers have native plant sales. So those are all good places. Now is a great time to plant natives. It's right now, just as the rains are starting, this is the perfect time to plant your natives. So here's a QR code. Later, you can take a picture of this with your phone and then go to that page, or just Google it. And here you can see the native plant resources in Southwest Oregon. If you want, you can sign up for our newsletter and then hear about classes and continue on your native plant learning journey. So remember, Now we've talked about how fire behaves, talked about the home ignition zone, talked about some species. So our goal is to become fire adapted ourselves. So learning, you're here to do that, and there are a lot more places you can do that. So go explore some of these websites and start doing some of the things that you need to do in your home ignition zone. Get a few natives, plant some natives. In terms of resources, so those websites, I just wanted to highlight this one because mulches have been a big concern. You know, people are concerned with soil health, and you don't want to have bare soil. And what we've seen in the fires is that those bark mulches are very flammable. So this is again from University of Nevada, Reno, and they talk about mulches. Compost is often recommended, sometimes pebble mulches. But again, if you get those wild ginger, then that's growing on your soil, or those strawberries. Those can be great things to cover your soil as well. Again, these are wonderful resources to look up. So in summary of our content here, you want to evaluate your plant choices. That's what I hope, is that you'll learn to do that yourself. So when bringing a fire-resistant framework to plant selection, consider: does the plant contain a lot of waxes, oils, or resins? What is the leaf moisture content? Does the plant have an open growth structure? It's not really dense and full of dead material. How fast does the plant grow? How much are you going to be able to maintain it? How tall will the plant grow? Does it shed bark? And pruning and maintenance and cleanup have a greater impact on whether a plant ignites than really the type of the plant. So all those factors are really important. So that's your content. And just keep calm and plant natives. I'm gonna hold for questions and go into my Almeida stories here. I'll just quickly go through this. So the Almeida fire happened here in 2020. It burned, as I said, we had 45-mile-an-hour. A lot of the West Coast actually was burning it was the Memorial Day fires. We had 45-mile-an-hour winds and single-digit humidity after a dry summer. And this is a picture from the air of it went through down a riparian area that was full of blackberries, which are great for igniting fires. Lots of dead canes down in there and a high open structure. So really great for carrying fire. And down through two towns, a lot of our town of Talent and our town of Phoenix, and 2,500 houses were burned. My husband's house was right there. So again, I walked around a lot after and took a lot of pictures, really noticing how things burned, what burned and what didn't burn. So these again are Leland cypress, just toast. If you have Leland cypress, prioritize taking that out this winter. Those junipers, those prostrate junipers, get rid of those for sure. So again, there's that picture where these were Leland cypress. This was a Scotch pine. This is an incense cedar. I don't worry about incense cedars as much. I really did not see them burn a lot. I'm not sure that I saw any of them really burn, more than just a little bit on the edges. Again, here's a picture of that incense cedar. These are fruit trees. So you can see these are deciduous trees. These were both pears. They got singed. They're both still alive and producing fruit. So again, they have a depressing effect on the intensity of the fire, which is good if they're in the right spot. Again, here's this incense cedar, and you can see it was next to this fence that burned. This side didn't burn. That's the pear tree that didn't burn. There was dead material down below it, and even that burned, and it didn't burn the tree. This is again that house, the house with the silver maple, which is not a native species, not a native maple, but it's, I looked into it and it's from an area where it is from a fire adapted landscape. Another one is that Siberian elm. That's another one that did pretty well and had a depressive effect on the fires. This is my husband's house. In the background here, you see this is a weeping willow, and this is another big silver maple next to several houses that have burned down, which I'm going to go to in a minute. But this weeping willow, again, very moisture-rich vegetation, surrounded by houses that burned down. The plant is not happy, but it itself did not ignite. That's what I mean by a fire-reluctant plant. So there's that weeping willow again. This is a weeping cherry. So again, another non-native, but right next to this burning car, these houses that burned down. Now, I wish I could show you a lot more natives, but these are urban landscapes and people don't plant a lot of natives in the urban landscape. I do have some more natives as we come up, but it's still interesting to look at the characteristics of the plant and what didn't burn. And again, this characteristics of being fire reluctant. So another moisture-rich vegetation, deciduous plant. So this is this big silver maple back in here that was behind these trees that burned, but it's just in the backyard. I mean, there were things that burned all around. And in the middle of that silver maple, there was this tree house nestled in right next to, the wind was blowing hard from this direction. So these houses were burning, casting embers. That silver maple had that tree house inside where embers could have been blowing and catching, but that tree is screening those embers, and that little tree house was just fine standing in that silver maple, which didn't burn. Again, these are the sequoias. So these are giant sequoias. So you can see in the background, this is an oak, which also a white oak, which has been singed and dried, but did not ignite. These back in here are Siberian elms that also did not ignite. The fire went across this meadow, went kind of up the trees, and then just fell back down to the ground. My husband watched that happen. And these giant sequoias, you can see all the ground burned. They're singed on the bottom, but they didn't ignite. I'm not saying that they couldn't or that they absolutely wouldn't, but I just noticed that they didn't. Everything can burn. So this is another area. This is a coast redwood. So again, the material on the ground here all burned. I'll show you ash. These are Oregon grapes. So again, Oregon grape, all of this burned. And then this is Oregon grape. So this Oregon grape was desiccated by the fire, but did not ignite, did not add to the conflagration of the fire. And again, I'm not saying that it couldn't, but in this case, it didn't. This is a ponderosa pine that, again, everything burned around it, but it didn't burn. Some of our ponderosas are really suffering with the drought. And again, if they're drought stressed, conditions could be different. This is a riparian area. This is Wagner Creek, where it comes down through Talent. Everything on one side of the fire, this side burned. I mean, everything burned on this side of this creek. It came to the creek. You can see that it went through the riparian area of the creek. Things burned. There are ashes there. It had been cleared recently. There had been some restoration that was done there, and it had been cleared not just immediately, but kind of recently. So the fire fell down to the ground and decreased in intensity. And here's this little house on the other side that didn't catch fire, possibly partly because of this deciduous, these deciduous trees, lots of alders. The alders didn't really, they were definitely fire reluctant, the white alders. So those are things that I observed, not the law, not the rules, but things that I observed. And so my advice is keep calm, plant natives, become a land steward, and join the Native Plant Society. And my 3 suggestions for you are, for your homework for the Sustainable Living series are, your low bar is obtain 1 native perennial and plant it in your yard. That would be one thing, you could get that done. 2 would be complete that home ignition zone assessment found in the back of the Land Steward PDF, which I showed there. And here's a link, but you can also just find it on the publications, and you can go through the whole thing, make a whole plan if you want, but definitely do the home ignition zone this winter. Good idea. And then the 3rd one is create a plan to transition 30% of your landscape to plants to fire reluctant natives. So those are my suggestions. And with that, we can take questions. I'll stop my share.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm gonna go back and got quite a few questions. Let me just pin your video. There we go. All right. So back here from Heather. Heather asks about native bunch grasses. She'd like to plant them in her pasture to replace non-native grasses. One part to her question, are they fire reluctant? There's a mowing requirement for grasses over 6 inches. Does this apply to native bunch grasses? And do deer like native bunch grasses?
So native bunch grasses are fire reluctant They definitely will burn. They will accumulate dry material. Natives used to burn the grasslands in our area every 2 years. So I think the key to having native grasses, and you can do that as well. There are certain amounts that you can burn as well to kind of keep things regenerated. Let's see. So they like to be regenerated. When they aren't burned, they kind of can become sort of decadent, or so you can mechanically kind of reduce them as well. Replacing a pasture with native grasses is kind of an expensive proposition, and there are some really good videos on the Land Steward YouTube channel about converting pastures to meadows. I would suggest starting small. Kind of depends on what your budget and your energy is, but it's a great thing to do, definitely a wonderful thing to do, and an investment of time and love. But they will burn. Grasses burn for sure. And that whole, if you're in town, that height limit is something that they do want things trimmed. But if you're in a rural area, you can create a defensible space and kind of keep some of it lower, trim some of it, and then not trim all of it. What I suggest to people, though, if they're replacing large areas with natives, is to kind of start around a tree or around an area and kind of begin in an area, or get a tarp and kind of kill off the non-natives in one area and kind of start slowly. The Understory Initiative sometimes has some grants to help folks work on that. So
And what about deer? Do deer like those native bunch grasses?
I'm not really sure. I mean, deer are meant to be more browsers, but I see them grazing in people's yards. So I wouldn't be surprised if they would nibble now and then at the grasses. But I don't think, I mean, I think they would be good if you're in town, and I'm not sure about that. If you want it kind of, you want something the deer won't eat all of, I think that would be true. So some well-placed bunch grasses, I think they don't necessarily eat them all.
From Artie, is there any research that teases out whether pathogens like sudden oak death are also more of a problem with the lack of fire?
So sudden oak death is carried by a pathogen that needs a really moist environment. It's not something it's a huge concern on the coast, where in our area in Oregon, it's mostly killing tan oaks. In California, it kills the black oaks in some areas where there's more moisture, but in our area, the professionals that I've talked to about it have said it's not as much of a concern. And white oaks are not susceptible to it. So what was the nut of her question? So I just wanted to say that it's not something in our area they're really talking about, but.
Are those pathogens more of a problem with the lack of fire? Do you know if there's research?
I don't know for sure about fire. It's moisture because it's carried by water droplets, the Phytophthora.
Susan presumes that rosemary may not be recommended.
Right. Rosemary is not a great one. That's a straight up HIZ question. I have my rosemary out by the sidewalk.
Okay. What about lavender? And
also, my lavender is out by the sidewalk.
Okay. And madrone?
Let's see. Madrone is, madrone is a pretty good one. If it's not like brushing your gutters and up right next to your house, but it doesn't tend to have a lot of fuels that are low. So they tend to self prune. And if they haven't, you can prune it up yourself to whatever it is, 10 feet or something like that. But no, madrones are pretty good. And also that leathery leaf, holds a lot of moisture. They can be affected by drought for sure, but in a landscape where you're irrigating, they would probably be pretty good.
I wonder too if manzanita has that.
Yeah, and manzanita is another one that the fire professionals hate to have in your yard. But if you have a manzanita bush and you pay attention to it and prune it and don't let it get a lot of little dead branches in there, a huge manzanita thicket, which is great wildlife habitat, will carry a lot of fire. But a manzanita bush, I don't see it as carrying, it's not full of a lot of twigs, but I think it's off of lists in a lot of towns. So, pay attention to that. Be thoughtful that way. It's a great early pollinator plant, though. It starts blooming, our white leaf manzanita starts to bloom in February.
Just something to keep attention to all of its extra branches as they start to die off toward the bottom of the plant.
Yeah.
You say?
Yeah. And really in towns, I think they're just off the lists.
Ian wonders, let's see, how do we promote the protection of our native oaks? I have spent time in Sacramento and Austin, and both do much more to protect their native oaks than penalize violators.
Oh, I know it. I know it. I think we're really behind. I think we look out our window and we just see lots of oaks and we're not worried. But everyone who's working on conservation is very worried. And our oak habitat has very much been lost. Education, more talks. Talk about how great oaks are.
Had some conversation here about where to buy native plants. Ian asks, can you talk more specifically about late summer blooming herbaceous perennials and bunch grasses that will hold up to irrigation to extend their growing season and resist summer dormancy? I would like to promote native oak savannas in my practice that include grasses, wildlife-friendly perennials that are also firewise.
Hang on, I'm going to pull the chat up. Where was that one? That was a lot. Who was that?
7 o'clock from Ian.
Okay. Let's see. Well, another good late, I mean, a lot of the asters are good late blooming. I mentioned Klamath Siskiyou seeds. That's from Susie Savoy. I'm not sure where you're coming from, Ian, but she has a nice little publication about pollinator plants that has kind of the wheel of time when things are blooming. I'm trying to think of where that comes from. I know I've seen that other places, but Solidago, ragweed is another good one. Asters are good ones. Let's see, where are we, Ian? Oh, Ian, okay. Bunch grasses that will hold up to irrigation to extend their growing season and resist summer dormancy. So my experience with natives that go summer dormant is that if I irrigate my yard a little bit, about 8 minutes every third day or so here. So it's things are not, that seems to be enough to keep things from getting wilty. And that for things like I have, for example, peony, native peony, which goes summer dormant. I have a lot of lomatiums that I love, and they go slowly summer dormant. So one of the things I want to put together a whole class encouraging people to love kind of wilting and dying plants, not as a fire hazard, but just to kind of, because many of our plants go summer dormant. So that's something. And to me, I really find them lovely. I am not concerned about it. And I think it's just a kind of a taste, developing a taste. And then, being wise about your environment there too. So, and I think a lot of bunch grasses are not recommended in urban areas, but again, judiciously placed. And I see them planted as well around town. And to my mind, if you're watering moderately, it will just sort of extend them, and then it's a matter of getting used to it, I think.
Great. What about sycamores? Bruce asks.
What about sycamore? Let's see. Sycamore is not native here, and that about it. So I'm not going to talk about it. Just kidding. They're from California. I mean, they are in California. They're lovely, a lovely plant. I think that they would be, my guess is they would be fire reluctant because they have deciduous, moisture rich vegetation, but they're not native here.
Okay. Marcy put in a plug for our native grasses class that's coming up November 19th. That's going to be in person and on Zoom. And the presenter will be bringing native grasses to give away during the class. So
wonderful. Yes. And she might have more. She's been doing studies about Medusa head, which is an invasive annual that really exacerbates carrying of fire in our area and habitat conversion. Yeah, that's a great one. If you're interested in native plants, I'm sure or native grasses, I'm sure she'll have a lot to say. And Susan says native plants seem to be slow growers and it's difficult to find particular species for sale. That's absolutely true. My technique is buy what you can get whenever you see it, and then learn to identify the plants and gather seeds and then plant them in little plants and get them started yourself. It's kind of like a great choose your own adventure of native plants. And they are slow, and I have really learned to love it. I have some lomatiums that I'm hoping they're going to bloom next year, and that'll be year 5 being in the ground. But it's really quite a relationship. You know, it takes commitment. It's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
Or maybe it is. It's for everyone.
What about California lilac?
Yeah, and Artie says summer fast. That's true. What about California lilac? So California lilacs are ceanothus, and that's a common name that's applied to a few different ones. In our area, ceanothus intergeramus is called deer brush sometimes in our area. That is a good one. Good bloomer. I'm not sure about, you'd have to go to Calscape and look at how many plants it supports, but probably a lot. The ceanothus definitely support a lot of pollinators. They're also nitrogen fixers. Again, you want to think about placement that can become a larger shrub, but they don't get a lot of dead material in them.
Is that one that can grow like up and over your head, like the buckbrush?
Yeah, it can, but I also see it, not so big. So, and you can prune it. It would be kind of a good replacement for like butterfly bush, although it just blooms in the spring.
Teresa brings up a good point that houses with madrones nearby may need to have their gutters cleaned out multiple times this summer because of leaf drop.
Yeah, that's true. It's best placement of trees is not to have them over your house, which can be hard to pull off, but yes.
Artie asks that wheel of bloom time is on Calflora, or maybe that was a statement.
Oh, Calflora, that's it. Yeah, I was talking about Calscape, Calflora. That's another great resource. So they have, it's like a pie chart, and it has the months and where the blooming is. So it's a good one to, a nice rabbit hole to go down and explore and think about species that you want to look for.
Christina brought up the cutting of oak trees and trees in general and creating heat islands and more dry areas.
Don't cut the oaks.
Rebecca asks what types of fencing for Firewise landscaping.
So the most important thing, and this is what I did, I have wood fences. I show you those pictures of some of the fences that burned and didn't burn at my husband's house. Depending on the vegetation that's next to them, they can act like a wick. So an important thing about cedar fencing is putting a panel of metal between your house and the fence. So you interrupt that flammable surface. Another thing to think about is, and this I've learned from fire professionals and also from experimentation with my own fireplace. I used to have an open fireplace, and I would put logs standing up against the wall next to the fire and watch how long it took for those logs to start to burn, or pieces of wood, and see how long it took them to start to burn. So, a vertical thing is kind of hard to start. You need like a lot of grass at the bottom, a lot of dead grass at the bottom or something to get it going up. And then carrying it, it depends on, do you have a lot of blackberries along it or whatever, but innately a vertical surface isn't like the easiest thing to start to burn with radiant heat. You need to have the fuels around it. But having what I did, again, I put a metal panel of whatever you call that metal sheet. I'm forgetting what the name of it is, that bumpily stuff you put on a roof if you're making a shed.
Yeah,
corrugated, it's not corrugated. Corrugated?
Yeah, the galvanized metal.
Yeah, galvanized, but it, wobbles in and out. So you'll see people making fences of that, and that you can actually make your whole fence out of that. But you can also, if you already have a cedar fence, just put a panel of that next to your house if it comes up to your house, or a few panels to break that wood.
You've got your native plants folks adding in a lot of good information. Lynn talks about how the native plants are slow growing because they're spending that first year or two to grow deep roots. So the first year they're sleeping, and the second year they creep, and then the third year they leap.
Okay, nice.
And Susan mentions the Ceanothus species, Ceanothus intergrinus,
Intergeramus.
Geranus
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Deer brush. If you look up deer brush, that'll.
is the one native plant that grows really fast and has beautiful blooms, but the deers enjoy it.
Nice.
And Christina also brought up the success or not with our natives is our soil, making sure that we have the right soil for what that native plant wants, and sun and water.
Right. And a lot of times native plants don't want fertilized, enriched soils. That's often the case. That just benefits non-natives. Right, the conditions. And that, again, that Calscape, those are good places to look that up.
And that is all I see in the chat.
Okay. Yay, perfect.
If anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask any questions.
Thanks for joining, everybody.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. This is a great presentation. I see quite a few thank yous coming in on the chat. And thank you everyone for joining us. I'll be sending out the link and also PDF to Rachel's presentation in a few days. And have a great evening, Rachel. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Great to see you.
Thank you, Rachel. We appreciate it.
Okay. See you tomorrow, Christina. Bye-bye.